Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
It is a heavy day here in Jerusalem. If you are listening to this from somewhere else in the world, you have likely seen the headlines. But for those of us living through it, the sound of the sirens and the distant thuds of interceptions, and the ones that were not intercepted, make for a very somber atmosphere. We are recording this on March 1st, 2026, just hours after a series of Iranian ballistic missile strikes hit central Israel, including Beit Shemesh and Tel Aviv.
It is a difficult time for everyone in the city and the surrounding areas. I am Herman Poppleberry, and normally I get really energized by the technical side of these discussions, but today it feels a bit different. When you are seeing reports of a synagogue destroyed in Beit Shemesh and lives lost, the technology stops being an abstract concept and starts being a matter of life and death. Our housemate Daniel sent us a voice note this morning asking the question that is on a lot of people's minds. If Israel has the most sophisticated, multi-layered, battle-tested missile defense system on the planet, how are these missiles still getting through?
That is the core of it, right? We have been told for years about the umbrella, the shield, the Iron Dome, and yet here we are. Daniel's prompt really gets to the heart of the disconnect between public perception of military technology and the brutal reality of physics and probability. We want to spend today looking at why missile defense is never what the officials call hermetic. Why is that 5% or even 1% failure rate so devastatingly significant?
Exactly. And to understand the failure, we first have to understand the layers. Most people know the name Iron Dome, but Iron Dome was never designed to stop what hit us today. Iron Dome is for short-range rockets, the kind fired from Gaza or southern Lebanon, basically flying pipes with explosives. What came from Iran today were ballistic missiles. These are massive, sophisticated machines like the Fatah-1 or the Shahab-3 that leave the atmosphere and re-enter at hypersonic speeds.
Right, so for that, you are looking at the Arrow system, Arrow 2 and Arrow 3. I think it is worth breaking down what these layers actually do, because when a ballistic missile is coming at you from 1,500 kilometers away, the defense is essentially a series of high-stakes handoffs.
It really is. Think of it like a football game where the defense has 3 different lines of players, each specialized for a different part of the field. Arrow 3 is your first line. It is an exo-atmospheric interceptor, which is a fancy way of saying it hits the missile while it is still in space. It uses a kinetic kill vehicle, basically a high-tech kamikaze drone that smashes into the target. There is no explosive warhead on the interceptor itself. It is just the pure force of 2 objects hitting each other at combined speeds of several kilometers per second. If you hit a target in space, you avoid the risk of the warhead detonating over a populated area, but you are trying to hit a bullet with a bullet while both are moving at thousands of miles per hour.
And if Arrow 3 misses in space, the handoff goes to Arrow 2, which operates lower down, in the upper atmosphere. Then you have David's Sling for the medium-range stuff, and finally, Iron Dome for any smaller fragments or shorter-range threats. But Herman, even with those 3 or 4 layers, we saw impacts today. Why? Is it just a numbers game, or is the technology itself being bypassed?
It is a bit of both, but we have to talk about the sheer speed involved. When an Iranian missile is in its terminal phase, that is the final descent toward the target, it is traveling at Mach 8 or higher. That is over 9,000 kilometers per hour. At those speeds, the window for interception is measured in heartbeats. If the radar tracking is off by even a fraction of a degree, or if the interceptor's thrusters have a millisecond of lag, the missile is past you before you can blink.
I was reading about the terminal phase maneuvers too. Some of these newer Iranian missiles are reportedly capable of changing their trajectory as they come back into the atmosphere. If a missile is just following a predictable arc, like a thrown baseball, it is easy for a computer to calculate where it will be. But if it starts zigzagging or adjusting its flight path at Mach 8, that makes the interception calculation exponentially harder.
That is exactly what we call a maneuvering reentry vehicle, or a MARV. It is a nightmare for defense systems. But there is another factor that I think people often overlook, and that is the geography and the physics of the Earth's curvature. Iran is roughly 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers away. While that sounds like a long distance, a ballistic missile covers that in about 12 minutes. You spend most of that time tracking it in space, but the actual decision to fire an interceptor and the flight time of that interceptor leave you with very little room for error. If you hesitate for 60 seconds, the window for an Arrow 3 interception might already be closed.
We also have to address the saturation problem. We have talked about this in previous episodes, like back in episode 880 when we discussed the Iranian Revolutionary Guard strategy. They do not just fire one missile, they fire salvos. If you fire 100 missiles at once, even if your defense system is 95% effective, which is an incredibly high world-class rating 5 missiles are going to hit, in a civilian area like Tel Aviv or Beit Shemesh, 5 missiles are a catastrophe.
And it is actually worse than that, Corn, because of decoys. This is something that came up in the reports today. Modern ballistic missiles often release decoys in space. These can be as simple as Mylar balloons that look like a warhead to a radar system. In the vacuum of space, a heavy warhead and a light balloon move at the same speed. So the Arrow 3 system looks up and sees not one target, but maybe 10 or 20. It has to perform what we call discrimination, deciding which one is the real threat. If it picks the wrong one, the real warhead continues on its way while you've just spent $3 million to pop a balloon.
That brings up a terrifying development from today's strikes. There was footage circulating, and we should be careful here because everything is still being verified. But there was footage that appeared to show cluster munitions being deployed over central Israel. Herman, how does a cluster warhead change the math for a system like David's Sling or the Arrow?
It changes the math completely and in a very dark way. Usually, you're trying to hit one big bullet with another smaller bullet. But a cluster munition or a submunition warhead is designed to break apart before it hits the ground. Instead of one massive explosion, it scatters hundreds of smaller bomblets over a wide area. If the missile performs this separation before the interceptor hits it, the defense system is suddenly faced with hundreds of targets instead of one. You cannot fire an interceptor at every single submunition. It is economically and kinetically impossible. It turns a single point of failure into a rain of fire.
So if the interception happens too late, you might actually be hitting the bus, but the passengers have already jumped out and are falling toward the target. That seems to be what happened in some of the Jerusalem area strikes today. Even if the main body of the missile is destroyed, the submunitions or even the heavy debris can still cause massive damage and loss of life. This is why the Home Front Command is so insistent that people stay in their shelters even after they hear an interception. An interception is not a disappearance, it is a collision.
Right. Physics dictates that the mass and the energy have to go somewhere. If you blow up a 1-ton missile at 10,000 feet, you still have a ton of flaming metal and unspent fuel falling on whatever is below it. I think this is where the phrase not hermetic really becomes important for people to understand. In the media, we often hear these systems described as a shield, which gives people the mental image of a solid wall that things bounce off of. But it is more like a goalie in a soccer match. A world-class goalie can be amazing, but if you pelt them with enough balls from different angles at high speed, eventually one is going to find the back of the net.
It is a sobering analogy, and it leads to a question about the cost-benefit analysis. We know that an Arrow interceptor costs millions of dollars, one single shot. The Iranian missiles are expensive too, but they are likely cheaper than the interceptors used to stop them. Are we seeing a situation where the offense simply has the economic advantage?
That is the classic asymmetric warfare dilemma. It is always cheaper to build a rock than it is to build a high-tech system that catches rocks mid-air. However, Israel has been working on something to address that, which we have mentioned before, the Iron Beam. It is a laser-based defense system. The idea is that the cost per shot becomes the cost of the electricity, which is negligible. But the problem is that lasers are currently limited by atmospheric conditions like clouds or dust, and they are mostly for shorter-range threats. For these high-speed ballistic missiles coming from Iran, we are still reliant on kinetic interceptors.
I want to go back to the human element for a second. We are talking about Mach speeds and kinetic kill vehicles, but as we discussed in episode 8081, the human element of spying and real-time intelligence is also part of this defense. To intercept the missile, you need to know it is coming the moment it leaves the launch pad.
Absolutely. The defense starts with satellite infrared sensors that detect the heat bloom of a missile launch. That data has to be instantly relayed to the fire control centers in Israel. If there is a delay in that intelligence chain, the defense system loses precious seconds of reaction time. Today, it seems the warnings were quite accurate, giving people several minutes to get to safety, but that does not stop the physical impact of the missiles that make it through.
It feels like we are in a new era of this conflict. In the past, we mostly dealt with unguided rockets. Now, we are seeing precision-guided ballistic missiles with sophisticated countermeasures. I think it is important for our listeners to realize that the technology is an arms race that never ends. Every time a defense system gets better, the offensive side develops a way to bypass it, whether it is hypersonic glide vehicles, decoys, or cluster munitions.
And that is why the term hermetics is so dangerous. If people believe the system is 100% effective, they might take risks they shouldn't. They might stay on their balconies to film the interceptions or ignore the sirens because they think the shield will protect them. The reality is that we are living in a statistical game where the stakes are human lives. Even a 99% success rate is not a guarantee for the person standing under that 1%.
It really puts the responsibility back on the individual to follow those safety protocols. But looking forward, Herman, where does this go? If the current layered system is being challenged like this, what is the next step in defense technology? Are we looking at space-based interceptors? Or is the answer more about taking out the launchers before they can fire?
Taking out the launchers is the preferred military strategy, but Iran is a massive country. They have underground missile cities and mobile launchers that move around the desert. It is the needle in a haystack problem. As for defense, the next frontier is likely a combination of higher power lasers and more advanced artificial intelligence for discrimination. By discrimination, I mean the ability for the radar and the interceptor to tell the difference between a Mylar balloon decoy and a real nuclear or conventional warhead in a split second.
It is incredible to think about the computing power required for that. You are analyzing radar cross-sections and thermal signatures at hypersonic speeds. It really is the cutting edge of what humans can build. But as we saw today in Tel Aviv and Beit Shemesh, even the cutting edge has its limits. Most people don't realize that these missiles actually go higher than the International Space Station at their peak, reaching altitudes of 500 kilometers or more. When you are falling from that height, gravity is doing a lot of the work for you. The kinetic energy alone is enough to level a building, even without explosives. You are essentially trying to stop a falling mountain.
A falling mountain that is also trying to trick you. It is a miracle that the interceptors work as well as they do, frankly. The engineering required to get a kill vehicle to hit a target that small, that fast, in the vacuum of space is one of the greatest technical achievements of the modern age. But as we saw with the tragedy of the synagogue in Beit Shemesh, it is a reminder that these are not just targets on a radar screen. These are places of worship, homes, and communities. When a missile gets through, it is not just a technical failure, it is a human catastrophe.
Well said, Herman. I think it is worth reflecting on how this changes the psychology of the city, too. We have lived in Jerusalem for a long time, and there is always a sense of being in a bit of a bubble because of the city's religious and historical significance. But today showed that no place is truly off-limits in this kind of high-tech war. Knowing how the system works and why it sometimes fails is actually a way to regain some of that sense of control. It is not magic, it is physics. And understanding the physics helps us understand why we have to take the sirens seriously every single time.
I agree. And you know, we have covered a lot of technical stuff today, but I think the practical takeaway for anyone listening, especially those in range of these threats, is that the technology is a tool, not a miracle. It buys time, it reduces casualties, and it is the best in the world, but it is not a substitute for caution.
We have talked about a lot of heavy topics recently, from the nuclear dark phase in episode 8083 to the post-Khamenei power struggle in episode 8080. It feels like all these threads are coming together right now. The technology, the politics, and the human cost. To summarize for Daniel and for everyone else, the missiles are getting through not because the defense is bad, but because the offense is incredibly fast, can maneuver, uses decoys, and sometimes just overwhelms the system with sheer numbers. And now, we have the added complexity of submunitions that scatter before impact.
That is it in a nutshell. It is a high-speed game of cat and mouse where the mouse has 1,000 ways to hide and the cat has to be perfect every single time. And in the real world, nobody is perfect every single time.
Before we wrap up today's episode, we want to give a quick thank you to Daniel for sending this in. He is usually the one who gets us thinking about these things over coffee in the morning, and today was no exception. It is good to have friends who push you to look deeper into the things everyone else is just skimming over.
Yeah, your feedback and your prompts really keep us going, especially on days like today. If you have been enjoying the show, or if you find these deep dives helpful in making sense of the world, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show and join the conversation.
It really does. And if you have questions about what we discussed today, or if you have a completely different topic you want us to explore, you can always get in touch through our website at myweirdprompts.com. There is a contact form there, and you can also find our full archive and RSS feed.
Stay safe out there, everyone. Pay attention to the alerts, look after your neighbors, and keep asking those weird questions.
This has been My Weird Prompts. I am Corn.
And I am Herman Poppleberry.
Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you in the next one.
Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.